Welcome to the SportsPro Podcast.
Hi everyone and welcome once again to the SportsPro Podcast. My name is Eoin Connolly. I'm the editor-at-large at SportsPro. Hope you're well. Our guest today is Guido, president of the NFL's San Francisco 49ers and the chairman and CEO of Elevate Sports Ventures. A few days or so ago, Al joined me for a wide-ranging conversation where he switched between those hats to discuss life at the Levi Stadium right now and share some thoughts on the future of sport and the fan relationship. He gave his reaction, of course, to the landmark set of broadcast deals just signed by the NFL for a reported $110 billion with a B over the next 11 years, how the teams were involved in those discussions and the onus on them now to adjust their media operations in kind. He also talked about a pretty extraordinary time in the history of the 49ers, who started 2020 on their way to the Super Bowl, you might remember, before taking part in that pandemic hit season from late last year. Al tells us what they learned playing behind closed doors, what they're doing now to prepare for the large-scale return of fans in a few months, and how he expects the game day experience to be changed not just by COVID, but by technology in the decade ahead. There's also room for a discussion about the 49ers' relationship with Premier League football club Leeds United, in whom they own a minority stake, and what Al is up to with Elevate, where he works across different sports and sits on a board with executive counterparts from other leagues like Tim Lewicki and Scott O'Neill. And if you want to know what it takes to turn an elite sports venue into a mass vaccination site, which the 49ers are very proudly doing in Santa Clara at the moment, well, you're in luck there too. It's a really enjoyable chat. I'm looking forward to sharing it with you. But first, as always, a couple of notices. If you do want to hear more reflection on the NFL's new media rights deals before we get to the main announcement, you could do a lot worse than listen in on Tom Bassam's recent bit of back and forth with former Fox Sports executive Patrick Crakes. You'll find that wherever you usually look for your SportsPro podcasts, and there's also a digested version on sportspromedia.com. And we've trailed it a couple of times on the pod before, but the agenda for SportsPro Live, our next virtual industry event, has now dropped, and there are some great names on there as promised. Some of them have appeared right here on the podcast. Boxing promoter and Matchroom Sport MD Eddie Hearn, Eurosport president Andrew Georgiou, England and Wales Cricket Board Chief Executive Tom Harrison, and Olympic Broadcasting Services Chief Executive Yanis Exarchios, to name but a few. We've also got Katie Tedman, Head of Partnerships and Marketing at NBA partner Dapper Labs. She's talking non-fungible tokens. You might have heard something about them, NFTs, in the past few weeks. James Rushton, co-CEO of DAZN. I'm sure you've heard something about them too recently. ATP chairman Andrea Gaudenzi, Philadelphia 76ers CRO Katie O'Reilly, Whoop founder Will Ahmed, Milwaukee Bucks EVP of Business Operations Raven Jemison. The list goes on and on and on and on. It's quite the lineup. We've got more great stuff on the virtual stage and some new concepts to try, masterclasses and show and tell sessions that get you deeper into some core skills and topics and help you do sports business for the future. Got the tagline in there as well, you'll notice. A lot to look forward to. It's all happening from the 28th to the 30th of April. SportsProLive.com is where you can find all the details and where, naturally, you'll want to go to register. That's SportsProLive.com. Should be great. So too should the next 50 odd minutes of your listening time. Let's hear now from San Francisco 49ers president Guido.
You're listening to the SportsPro Podcast.
Guido, president of the San Francisco 49ers. Welcome to the SportsPro Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you coming on in what I'm sure is a lovely Northern Californian morning. Not quite the same here in Southeast London, but we're between NFL seasons. But I feel like at this moment in time, it's the biggest sports industry story in town, and there's only really one thing that people are talking about as far as the NFL goes, and that's $110 billion worth of media rights deals over 11 years when the next one winds down in kind of 18 months or so. What's your reaction to that, first of all? What was, I guess you would have had some inkling of what was coming, but, how do you feel now that all of that is over the line?
Well, obviously, I feel great as a president of an NFL team and as a member of a broader league of 32. I think it shows the strength of our content. We knew going in week after week, obviously, how many people were viewing our games, and not just viewing our games, but viewing all of our content 365 days a year. I know Roger Goodell and Brian Rolap and team felt good going into those negotiations. I know our partners felt good about the product that was on the field. I think the competitive balance in our league speaks to every game matters, which obviously drives more eyeballs. I think you've seen record scoring, you've seen point differential in games, draw dramatically close, which means every game's going down to the wire, which keeps people in tune. So I feel really good as a member of this league, and obviously as a San Francisco 49er. For us, it's good to have stability inside of our league from a broadcast perspective for obviously the foreseeable future.
What's the process internally? I mean, Roger Goodell and Brian Rolap will go over and negotiate and make the deals with these media companies, and at the end of the day, but what role do the owners have, and then what role do you have, in the kind of executive function within NFL teams as the meat of these deals is being put together prior to negotiation?
Well, I think our role as a team, as a member of the broader NFL, is to obviously put a very good product on the field, to invest in our players and our stadium experience. But on top of that, we run our content obviously year round on the 49ers side. And so I think what they're looking for from us, if you're a league level employee, is an investment in our studios, our broadcast, our social and digital metrics, how we're growing our fan base. The 49ers are a top team in the NFL around, social and digital followers. And so I think, they're only as strong, or we're only as strong as the 32. And, I think what the NFL does a good job at is making sure that the teams have all the data points necessary to them, that the teams are investing in their social and digital channels, in their content, that our players understand what it means to sort of take the helmet off and get people sort of a look inside of who they are and what they stand for. And for us, I mean, the larger our audience is as a single team, right, only supports and benefits the league as a whole. So I feel like our job is, call it 365 days a year minus the days that the games are on broadcast television, because obviously that's up to the broadcasters. But we need to be growing our fan base year round, and engaging our fans year round, so that Roger and Brian and the whole team at the NFL have a compelling story to those broadcast partners around the engagement level of a fan base, right, or fan bases throughout the country.
What comes next now for the teams now that those deals have been finalized? I mean, you're obviously able to start planning with a little bit more certainty what the rest of the 2020s look like financially. But what kind of expectations? I mean, you've talked about the need to be producing content and connecting with fans year round. But what are some of the practicalities that you now go away and work on now that you know who's going to be showing the games? There's going to be kind of we're going to see more from Amazon. We're going to see streaming platforms coming into the picture a lot more over the course of the next few years. What are the implications for you as an organization of all of that? What are the steps that you've got to go away and work on?
Well, I think if you look at how an NFL team or a league is made up from a revenue perspective, you can easily get to what's next. So the first bucket is obviously media. Now that's checked, we know where that comes. The next buckets are what we would call local revenue. So what a team is able to derive. So sponsorship, suite revenue, ticket sales, etc. For the San Francisco 49ers and for a whole host of teams, not just in the United States, but obviously all over the globe, we weren't able to recognize any type of really, ticket revenue or what we call gate revenue in the NFL. And so what's next is getting fans back in stadia. The good news is that's what's next for all of us. We're sort of universally aligned on that front. And the challenging part of that is obviously it's a little bit out of our control in the sense of to some degree, it comes down to vaccine distribution, where your state and county local, guidelines are. But we're solely focused right now on making sure that we support our community in vaccine distribution. Levi Stadium is doing, upwards of 5,000 vaccines a day. And so, if you look at the United States as a whole, we're averaging a little over 2.5 million vaccinations a day. If you extrapolate that out over a period of time, you can start to get the herd immunity within a 4 or 5 month period. Obviously, the Biden administration has made some, statements in and around when everyone in America will be able to get a vaccine. So, makes you feel better for sure about the ability come August or September to put fans back in your stands. And so for us, that is a huge revenue stream that still has a question mark to it. And so our focus completely shifts to what are we doing? How are we doing it? And how are we working with our partners at the county and the state and the federal government to ensure that we're creating a safe space for fans when they come back to the stands.
Let's pick up on that for a second, because at Levi Stadium you have been in the position that a lot of sports teams around the world have been in over the last kind of 3 or 4 months, which is acting as a distribution center for vaccines, acting as a place where members of the public can come and get themselves vaccinated. Obviously, it's a fantastic position for sports teams to be in, and I know I'm sure it's a source of great pride for you guys. I know it is for lots of other teams and venue operators around the world. How does that process work? How do you, at what point were you in touch with the California government, and at what point were you beginning preparations to make Levi Stadium safe for that kind of operation?
Yeah, well, it dates back all the way to the testing and protocols around the National Football League. So last year, when we decided, obviously, move forward with the season on time, we rolled out a testing protocol for our players, and then we're able to work with the county around how do we safely put games on at Levi Stadium, even though there's no fans there. As things progressed and we knew the vaccine was coming, we started to have conversations with the county, Santa Clara County Health Department, in and around how to, what the vaccine distribution was going to look like. Now, obviously, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, but we do know how to operate and we do know how to move people. We know how to move people, 70,000 people on game day within a period of time. So we know how to operate. And we knew that obviously vaccine distribution would feel a lot like a game, right? How do you move people in and out? How do you prioritize who gets it? How do you build the website to talk about, how you make an appointment? And so the process started around, I would say, November, December. And then once the vaccine distribution came from the federal government, we were able to roll out, slowly. And then the county built the tiers. And so in the United States, it has a tiered system. Obviously, it started with everybody that was over 65. And obviously, anyone that had pre-existing health conditions that would make you susceptible, obviously, in a negative way to the virus. And so once the county got up and running, the county distributes the vaccine. Levi Stadium is just the site that obviously you're able to use. And for us, the reason why our site made so much sense is it has ample parking. It has 2 million square feet that you can access, right? The indoor space in our club areas, if you think about hospitality stadia in the UK, right? There's such tremendous areas for you able to go to. They're pristine, right? They're easy to move around in. There's a boatload of space, and that's what we needed to do so. So for us, that's where it started, and now it's really ramped up. I mean, we hope to be doing upwards of 15,000 vaccinations a day. We have the capacity to do more than that. It comes down to how the supply works in the US. There's a couple different mass vaccination sites in California. We're the largest of them all. But obviously California is a big state in our union. So there's a lot of supply to get to, a lot of people to get to.
Yeah, are you expecting to see more people coming through as you have fewer vulnerable people being vaccinated, so more people who are able to get to the stadium themselves, and more people who are, for whom perhaps crowding and social distancing is less of a concern, and as numbers go down as well, and actually spreading virus at the vaccination site becomes less of a concern?
Yeah, we certainly believe that well, we don't believe, we know that vaccine distribution will tick up, so to say, due to an increase in supply in this country. Obviously, we started in this country with Pfizer and Moderna. Recently, obviously, Johnson and Johnson was approved here in the United States. They're down the path right now on AstraZeneca, and so yeah, the Biden administration has sort of made statements around that everyone in the U.S. will have access to a vaccine, or they'll open it up in the May timeframe. And so, at our site, obviously, you would need to be a county resident to get a vaccine at Levi Stadium, and so only the folks in our county will be able to come here. Now, will that change? I don't know. That's kind of what the state and the county decide. But I do foresee a world in which right now there's a whole host of people that would obviously go get a vaccine if they were able to, based off the tiered system. And so I know our fan base is super excited to come down and get a vaccine when necessary, so that they can obviously come back into the stadium on game day.
And in terms of that operational side of things, how did you design the vaccine site? Was that your venue team? Did you just kind of hand over to public health authorities to say, okay, well, you have this hospitality venue, we need to take these movable walls and get them over there?
It was a collaboration between both teams. I mean, they had already had a smaller vaccination site at what they called the fairgrounds in San Jose, and we were able to go over and look at that site set up. Our county decided not to have drive-through sites, so they really dictated that they wanted everything to be indoors, so to say. So we did a number of walkthroughs. There was a certain way that they wanted to set up, obviously, the vaccine. Getting the vaccine, they need to be spread out, the tables, who does, obviously, those injections. But what I would say, we really lent our support within the parking, transportation, logistics, moving, getting all the tables and infrastructure set up for them. And then they decided, obviously, how they were going to do the vaccine distribution.
I mean, before we get too far down a rabbit hole with this, and I may have spoken too late on that, but what does all of this say about, how does all this fit with how you've reached out to fans and tried to kind of keep your arms around the 49ers community while you haven't had match days, game days at Levi Stadium? And what role do you have beyond opening the stadium up for this exercise for getting people vaccinated? What role do you have in terms of messaging, in terms of making sure that people take up the opportunity to go and get their jabs done if they are not eligible, if they're not kind of county residents, and making sure that people continue to follow kind of best practice when it comes to safety around the virus as well?
Well, if you bifurcate our jobs as a football team, right? So as an American football team, our jobs is to entertain, right? To educate, to provide a quote unquote escape from that's what sport does, right? And so I think from a football side of the perspective and the business of the San Francisco 49ers, not a lot changed, but how we did it changed, right? And so just like we're doing here today, if you think about how we engaged in our fan base, we did a lot of virtual events. We did a boatload of podcasting. How we shot and captured our content was very different in a virtual world, and not being able to be close to our players. So we did, even our NFL draft was virtual. Our NFL State of the Franchise, or San Francisco 49ers State of the Franchise, was virtual. Our pregame shows were, virtual for our fans so that they can listen in. So we never wanted anyone to get too far away from the sport itself. And our fans didn't either. And if you think about it, like, they were starving for NFL content. They desperately wanted us to play, to provide some level of escape from, frankly, their day-to-day lives and the news. I mean, I don't think I don't think I'm putting this lightly. Like, 2020 was a tough year for everyone. And I think football and or sport, all sport, created some level of, again, an escape away from the daily news cycle. And so we had our jobs to do on that front, and it didn't change. Now, how we did it changed dramatically. And then on the community side, I always say the San Francisco 49ers are more than what they do on the field of play. We are a member of our community. And so if you think about what's happened, whether it starts with voting, that was really the first initiative in America. Obviously, we had no different than across the world. We had a quote unquote a highly engaged electorate that really wanted to participate in a U.S. election. So we opened up Levi Stadium as a voting center. There was a number of things, unfortunately, that continued to happen in this country around social justice initiatives and what that means for not just the San Francisco 49ers but our broader community. And I'm proud of what we were able to do on that front. And I'm proud of what our players stood up for after the George Floyd murder here in the U.S. and a whole host of other names that, unfortunately, the list is just too long and it continues on. And so I would say our jobs didn't feel, in my mind, it didn't feel all that different from a normal year, both good and bad at times, except for it's really hard to connect in this virtual world, right? The first couple months, we all probably said, "Oh, we can do this. This isn't that bad. We'll find ways." But human connection is lost. It's very different than sitting across from someone in a stadium or in a restaurant or in a bar, right? Watching your favorite sport. And so I think what sport did is it provided some level of, reality to, hey, the life can go on. Everything doesn't need to stop. We can continue to play. We can continue to work. We can continue to celebrate certain things. But the reality is there's a lot I would want to throw away in 2020 and never do again, because I like to get back to some semblance of normalcy. And so I'm proud of what the 49ers meant to our community and to the broader California market, both on and off the field, as it relates to the things that are most important in our daily lives, both sport and non-sport.
I want to get on to the return of fans very shortly and kind of how this 21-22 season is going to look for you guys. But just staying on that period with stadiums closed, but also the fact that you guys went and came out of a Super Bowl, and then all of the kind of the scale of the pandemic, even though it had been a story in the early part of last year, the scale of it really hit home after the NFL season had finished, which was, compared to other major leagues, it was a different position to be in, because you think NBA, NHL had to stop their seasons in mid-flight, as did most of the major football leagues, certainly in the Northern Hemisphere. How did that change the way that you were approaching all of these issues? The fact of kind of disconnection, personal disconnection from fans, the role that you had within the community, all that stuff, because the crisis really hits when you're still working, but you're not in kind of season mode. Do you think that affected the way that you approached all those challenges?
Well, I feel blessed because I wear two hats, right? I wear the president of San Francisco 49ers and the CEO of Elevate Sports Ventures. And Elevate Sports Ventures, we represent over 100 properties now all over the globe. And so in a way, looking back on it, it was helpful to be involved in so many different sports and entertainment, because I was able to be part of the conversation when really the pandemic hit hard and it stopped a couple different sports teams, and we were operating on behalf of some of those. And so I was sort of in the throes of it, even though the 49ers weren't, right? To your point, the 49ers were able to sit back and learn a little bit before we had to really launch an NFL season. And so I leaned on a lot of my peers, both here and across the globe. I mean, I remember having detailed dialogues with folks at the Bundesliga, which I think all of us felt like they were the first ones to come back. And I remember being privy to their kind of return to play documents and how they were going to go about their testing and their protocols. And for me, it really helped guide how I felt about it at the San Francisco 49ers and more broadly the National Football League. Myself and a few of our other team presidents spearheaded a call that happened every week between about 16 of my peers at the National Football League to talk through health and safety, right, which was the first part of it. So, and a lot of it we didn't control. We leaned on a gentleman named Alan Sills, who's the chief medical officer of the National Football League, to decide what was our testing and contact tracing protocols going to be. But what we were trying to figure out at the team side is, how are we going to adjust for a no fan world? So how are we going to try to earn as much revenue as possible? So that gets into your sponsorship, right? And so this year you saw what was physical tarping around the National Football League, and it served two functions, right? It served one function of, when we did have fans in those states that did, it created a good enough barrier between fan and player that everyone felt healthy. While at the same time, it created sponsorship assets that teams otherwise didn't have in the past, right? If you think about the National Football League compared to maybe international football or soccer, I guess for those Americans who might be listening to this, we don't really have the San Francisco 49ers do not have what they call TV visible sponsorship signage, right? We don't have LED on the field. And so we needed to be able to provide our sponsors, who generally rely on impressions that happen in the stadium, right? The 70,000 people that come to the stadium. So how are we going to drive revenue or drive impressions or drive value for those sponsors? And so I spent a lot of time in the offseason trying to figure out both physical assets in venue that could be picked up on TV, and social and digital assets that we could either ask for from the National Football League, rules and regs we don't normally have, right? Or that we could create on our own that would provide value to our partners, so that we could earn some revenue in the 2020 year versus rolling it all over to the 2021 season, right? And so for me, I spent a lot of time looking at other leagues and what they were doing, not just by getting their players back on the pitch or the diamond or whatever it is you want to call it, but actually how they were engaging in the fans and how they were thinking about monetization efforts relative to sponsorship, because we all knew that was going to be really the only revenue stream we could, one, sell, and actually two, earn, versus, again, just rolling over to the next season.
Did you learn anything about what assets you have? Because I mean, a lot of those assets you're describing are ones that are going to disappear or be replaced by the value of having fans back in the stadium. But was there anything that you learned about? You thought, oh, maybe we could be trying this. We could take this out of the COVID era and make it a part of the mix of what we do as a team the rest of the time.
Yeah, I think a lot of our social and digital assets, our virtual assets, so to say, how folks engage in content, which gets back to where we started this conversation, right? Which is, probably the thing that gets talked about a lot in the NFL media deals, is the Amazon deal. And I think if you take that at a national level, well, if you bring that down to a local level, what we were able to find this year is the engagement on our social and digital channels only went up during the pandemic, dramatically went up during the pandemic. And so as you think about creating digital franchises, whether that's a podcast franchise with players, or whether that's a state of the franchise on the 49ers, or whether that's we call it inside the oval, right? Where we do a monthly sort of virtual session for our season. We were able to engage with our season ticket base better than I think we actually did pre-pandemic. Because what happened is, essentially, technology was sort of forced upon everyone, right? There was no, this adoption creep that happened in the past, right? Well, you think about like mobile tickets and how it was slow to adopt. Well, that's because people didn't have to. They had a physical ticket that they could use. But in this world, like, even my mother and my father, who are technologically challenged, learned how to download things that ultimately connected them with us. And so if you take that same perspective, you now have a much more engaged fan base on your digital and social platforms. And so what that meant was, if we were able to provide content that was engaging, right, it created an opportunity for us to go to our sponsors and say, while this might not be what you traditionally would have valued at the team, it actually could be more engaging, right? It could be more sticky over time. And there was a lot of things. If you look at the NFL draft, in some ways, it was actually more engaging because our fans got to see the inside of Kyle Shanahan's house. John Lynch's place, right? It normalized what is in some of these people's minds, these heroes, these people that they look up to, that they cheer for. It normalized us all, and it created a way for us to feel an intimacy level with the people that we might not ever get to meet in person, but we feel more in tune with who they are, what they're about, what happens at their houses, their kids, their dogs. And so for me, I think those platforms will continue on, and we will invest heavily in creating content that scales across every single digital platform out there. Because I think that our fan base now, and to some degree, they were forced to accept those platforms, but they've now seen the value that those platforms can bring to them as fans, and the content that they can derive from engaging in those.
Hello, this is Matt Rogan. I've spent my career creating and scaling businesses in sports and entertainment. And now I'm trying to find out how businesses can best make their way through these extraordinary times. So together with SportsPro and with leaders from inside and outside sport, I've created the Playbook series. It's the place to go for agenda-free, pragmatic advice to navigate your organisation through change. Catch up on our library of articles and podcasts and learn more about how our new Labs program can help you succeed. Head to sportspromedia.com/playbook to find out more.
By the same token, what's the time frame over which you start to recognize the long-term effect of that? Because what we might see in the next year, 18 months, is people really embracing the physical again, quite literally, when you think that people are going to be able to hug and stuff. But people, literally, people really being excited to get back to live events, people really being excited to get back to in-person experiences. And you might start to see some of the things that they have spent their time doing over the last year get not abandoned altogether, but they spend less of their attention on that. And then I suppose the pendulum would swing back again once the novelty of normality wears off. So where do you kind of have a cycle or a time frame that you're thinking about when you're building the value of these things back into your long-term planning?
Well, the good news is I don't think any of them will stop, in the sense of it, the San Francisco 49ers, right? There will only be, let's just say, 700,000 people that get to engage in a home season at our stadium. And yet there's 10 million people that are fans of the San Francisco 49ers. So one could make the argument that, investing in a fan base that is so starved for to be connected to the San Francisco 49ers, the majority of those people are not connected in the physical sense of being in our stadium. And so I think the making sure, one, they're engaged, two, that they're supportive, and three, obviously from a business perspective, that we're monetizing the 10 million plus quote unquote fans in our ecosystem. That does not mean that we're not going to focus on the 70,000 people that come to a game, because obviously we'll continue to do that. My hope, and this is just me personally, it's like the emotional side of this, is I think at a time there was when television became such that HD TV, we all remember when we went from a blurry screen to a really crisp, clear screen, and everyone said, "Oh my God, it might take away from people going to a sporting event because it's so good on television, or it's so good on our streaming platforms." I think what people have felt during this pandemic is that maybe we took those human interactions for granted, and maybe we took going to a ball game for granted. And there is really, truly nothing that compares to being in a live stadium. And coming across the pond, and obviously the 49ers having involvement with Leeds United, and being in that building and hearing the roars and the chants. And the same thing at the San Francisco 49ers when I last left the 49ers from a fan perspective, it was the NFC Championship game against the Green Bay Packers, and it was the most electric environment you could ever be in. I hope and I believe that no one will take those for granted anymore because something so important has been stripped away from us for so long. And it is the social and human connection to those we love and care about, but to also to a complete stranger who we can be friends with right away because they wear the same colors we do and they cheer for the same team we do. And I believe when consumer health confidence returns, sporting events, content, it will come roaring back. 2021 and 2022 will be the largest content years in our life. Every artist will go on tour, right? Every sport will look to have more events. Every stadium will look to host more people. And for me, wearing both my Elevate and my San Francisco 49ers hat, it is like an amazing time to be involved in sport. And if anyone ever thought that it was on the decline, like I think ratings like, oh, they're steady or they might decline or they might go up. If anyone ever sort of had a underappreciation for the value of sport in people's lives, I think that quickly got reversed during this pandemic. That the value of one, following your favorite team, and two, being in your favorite team's stadium, people can't wait to go do that again when the time is right.
Let's talk about that. You will be hoping to have maybe even full stadiums by the time we get to September. Who knows quite what path local regulations will take, but what are the steps that you take now? How do you get the venue ready, and how do you set fans' expectations for what it's going to be like? Because it won't be quite like end of 2019, start 2020.
That's right. So what I would say is like from an operations perspective, you don't want to go too far because, excuse me, when you get back to quote unquote normalcy and you have vaccine distribution and herd immunity at high levels, you will ultimately then move away from social distancing, so to say, and because you'll get back to full capacity stadia. And so the good news for Levi's is, Levi's is not that old from a stadium perspective, and it was built. And we were joking as we got on this podcast. I'm in my house today, so I'm not in the stadium, but it was built with the best technology of any stadium around from an infrastructure perspective. And so the 49ers were already down the path of mobile ticketing, touchless, contactless, all of those things, right? And I think that it's become easier again in the technology adoption curve. It's been easier for people to pay with their phones now. It's been easier for people to download their mobile ticket, right, and come into a stadium. I think what will change logistically is some of the food and beverage and how that might operate right away. You might move away from buffets if that happens in stadiums in the VIP areas to more sort of individual self-service. You'll see that change ultimately. But I'm really looking forward to frictionless, the ability to walk inside a stadium, to have your phone identify yourself, to literally not ever maybe even take out your phone or your wallet again. Levi Stadium and the 49ers prior to the pandemic announced that we were going to do an all-inclusive food and beverage for all 70,000 seats. It's never been done before in the world of sport. And truthfully, I was a little worried about rolling that out last year because I'm not sure the tech was completely there. Now, not only is the tech there, but adoption is off the charts because people now know how to use those things, and they know how to use them across all demographics. And so now I'm like pumped about it because I feel like we're primed and ready to be able to take advantage of that.
Sounds like a dangerous afternoon at an NFL game, all inclusive food and beverage.
Well, in fairness, you have to buy your booze. So, we can't just give it away because we understand the need to be safe on that perspective, and so for sure we still want to make sure that people are responsible in our stadiums. So for us, that was a key.
Absolutely. Instant disclaimer. That takes us nicely onto where I kind of wanted to spend the last part of the conversation, which is, you spend a lot of your time thinking not just about the future of sport, but thinking about that in the context of the whole industry rather than just the NFL. You head up Elevate, which you founded with senior executives from teams in other sports, people like Scott O'Neill. who's active in the NBA and the NHL. And the 49ers now, as you alluded to earlier, have this stake in Leeds United. What's the direction of travel for sport in the next few years? What are the priorities?
Well, I think it's dependent upon what league and sport you're in, right? I think that if you think about, we have a number of MLS clients, and obviously they were hit really hard because to your earlier question, they will now have had 2 seasons impacted by the pandemic, where the NFL, you can make the argument, might have one full season, but not, this coming year might not be as impacted by the pandemic. It's a growth stock league, in my opinion, right? It's heavily derived from gate revenue. And so, but they have new media coming up right now that I think they're bullish about, as they should be. It's growing tremendously in the United States. And if you've seen some of these expansion franchises come on board, and the valuations of those expansion franchises and the ownership groups that have come in, guys like Arthur Blank and David Tepper, who obviously own the Carolina Panthers, and we support Carolyn Kindle Betts in St. Louis and their MLS team and what they're doing. I mean, they'll, not to steal too much, but I like to think that, when the financials come out and the revenue comes out of that club, I think everyone will frankly be blown away by the demand that they're seeing in their marketplaces. And so it really depends on what league you're in. In Major League Baseball, I think, the future of the regional sports networks and what that might mean in the United States, which is a little bit different than what the NFL has to deal with, right? We don't have we have regional sports networks, but they don't cover our games. And so, and then if you think about overseas, again, like the English Premier League, without having, fans in the stands, what that means to revenues and all the things that come with that. So for me, I think it just depends on where you are in your quote unquote growth cycle as a league or a team. And every single one is different. I think we've seen quite a bit of investment in sport from, whether it's venture capital or private equity. That sort of accelerated more than maybe it would have if not for a pandemic. I think you've seen an acceptance of, whether it's platforms or sponsorship categories, that maybe were a little bit slower. Like, I think about what the UK has done in gambling, and how far behind, the US was, and maybe accepting that form of sponsorship. And now we see it broadly accepted in the US, and it's become a massive category in sponsorship, where here it wasn't as much as it was in the UK. So again, I think it depends on what league and team you're in, and where you're at within your own growth cycle. But I'm very bullish on sport, as a whole, because I think if you look at any type of consumption, certainly media consumption, traditional sort of broadcast television has declined, as we all know, but consumption of sport has, whether it's either increased or, what you want to say, flatlined. The actual delta between who's consuming sport and who's consuming traditional television has only widened. If I am a media company looking for engaging content, I think sports is definitely the place I want to be.
Why did you think, this is a brilliant bit of interview management, because this is probably the question I should have asked before, but why did you think a project like Elevate was the way to go, where you're, rather than perhaps solely working with investors or investment specialists, or solely working with kind of agency people, you decided to go this kind of multi-sport route? What solution were you offering that you weren't seeing when you put that together?
Well, our agency blends what I call the art and science of sales and marketing. And so I think as revenue and monetization, if you look at the just the value of these teams, the investments that these people are putting in, it's become a very sophisticated business overnight, right? And I think that teams are constantly, the risk profile has gone up for any owner of a sport or a team. The investment that they put into their players, that they put into their stadium, everything has gotten more expensive. And so with that came what I would call like an acceleration of how teams think about the revenue and the monetization efforts around their club. While we don't, quote unquote, sit on the cap table of teams, meaning we don't invest per se on the cap table of teams, what I think we do, what I hope we do, and what we've proved to do over time with our clients is we make investments in them relative to the sales and marketing efforts that are so critically important to the financial success of those clubs. Without giving too much away to competition, I truly believe that sales is sales, but sales, there's been so much data and analytics that have come into sport that I think the Elevate sits on true IP, intellectual property, that I know differentiates us from some people inside of the sport to understand how to price, sell, package both content and sponsorship and hospitality assets. And at my core, I like to believe I'm an operator of sport, right? I run a team, day to day. And so I know what it feels like to sit in the chair or the seat of those who are operating a team. And I think that puts us in a unique perspective where we're not just an agency. We are truly operators, and we bring a unique perspective to those who, again, sit in the seat and make those very difficult decisions. And those difficult decisions can either set up a franchise for long-term sustainable success or can set a franchise back. And if you think about what it takes certainly in the US, if you looked at what it takes to build a stadium now, arenas now cost $1 billion, not just stadiums. Stadiums cost multi-billion dollars. And so if you think about that risk profile, you really can't get it wrong. You can make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I make a lot of, but to do that, you might only do it one time in your history. And so to do it right and to maximize every single square footage of a building is really critically important to both short-term and long-term financial sustainability.
Where does that sit alongside what the 49ers have been doing with Leeds, that sort of taking knowledge from one part of the sports industry and applying it elsewhere? And obviously that is an ownership stake. It's not your money, but it's it's your team's money that's going into Leeds in a much bigger way. But where's the value in that exercise as you see it?
Well, the financial value obviously is, we truly believe in the club and where it could go. Prag Marate, who's on the board at Leeds and who's the president of 49ers Enterprises, which is our investment arm at the San Francisco 49ers. He would say, and I would agree with, that Leeds United and the 49ers had a lot of similarities in the sense that we were, the 49ers, once a, quote unquote championship team, 5-time Super Bowls, right? Leeds United the same. And we fell on hard times. And, we went through a period of time where we weren't a playoff team. And, our revenues were maybe at the bottom half of the NFL. And, with investment in the team and the players and sophistication and a stadium, ultimately brought us back to a top quartile team in the National Football League relative to business, but also, brought us back to prominence on the pitch or the field. And obviously, you're not going to win every year. You hope to win every year, but we saw a lot of similarities with Leeds, right? It had a tremendous fan base and following. Sold out matches every single game, even in the second division, and a pedigree of a team that we knew we believed, as you work with Andrea and Angus, that run, I guess, efficiently and with the thought of becoming a sustainable Premier League team, we could help or guide. Now, the reality is we're not experts. Angus is certainly the expert, right? And we have a lot to learn. But I think that some of those key components of what makes a franchise or a club successful are the same in the US as they are over there. Now, some of the ways in which you go about it are very different, but I would say the components themselves are the same. It's an engaged fan base. It's a good stadium experience. It's social and digital concepts and monetization. It's obviously quality players on the pitch and management and sporting side, an investment that makes these teams really good. And I hope, and I know Prague's doing a lot with the club, and we have weekly calls with the club to at least have open dialogue around, the pros and cons, or some of the, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, so they say, of how we might be able to engage with the team and make it a little bit better.
Can it get deeper, that relationship, financially or otherwise?
The answer is always sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, yeah, look, I think it's already gotten deeper in the sense of our increased stake in the team, our involvement in the club. So, what I would say is we are committed to Leeds United. We love the club. We love the supporters. We love the management team. And, it's fun in the Bay Area waking up and watching their matches and texting back and forth with the folks over there. And so for us, like, the engagement level is what I guess, to answer your question, our engagement level is off the charts. And I will tell you, and I'll tell any Leeds supporter listening, you have a very passionate and engaged operation here at the San Francisco 49ers that, one, want to help, but two, want to get back to the place that every Leeds supporter, Leeds United supporter, wants to get back to, and that's at the top of the table in the Premier League.
Well, I'm sure there are some Leeds supporters listening, and I'm sure they would love to hear more about that whole plan, but we are about to run out of time. So let's finish on the 49ers. You're very busy at the moment, signing a lot of players, re-signing a lot of players. What do the next few months hold for you, and what are your hopes for next season?
The next few months, so NFL draft is coming up, so that's the next big one. Obviously, we're still in free agency, and you're right, we've been able to re-sign a lot of our players and add talent, which is a testament to John Lynch and Prague Marate and Kyle and all those folks at our team. It's also a testament to what kind of culture we have at the team, that a lot of our players wanted to come back after such a tough year on the field due to a lot of injuries. Then it's the draft, where we'll add, we have 9 picks in the upcoming NFL draft. In the first round, we have the number 12 pick in the draft. So obviously, adding impact players to our roster, we believe is really, really important, where you build a team. And then the next is getting our guys back on the field in Santa Clara and at Levi Stadium in front of fans. I have a strong desire, and I know our team does, to get back to the mountaintop, which is the Super Bowl, and to have a different outcome than we did 2 years ago. That's where we want to be.
Okay, well, all the best with that, Al. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
The SportsPro Podcast is published by SportsPro Media. The producer is Ed Dixon.